I find that most people in discussions around faith and spirituality, as with many other issues, people just pick up their beliefs in bits and pieces. They kind of pick them up along the way. They hear something that sounds good or they've heard it enough, and so they learn to repeat it. And so this idea that, there can't just be one way, right? We all know there are many paths to God. The reality is that probably people really haven't thought that through. And so a part of our witness, I think, is just in helping them think it through. And the way that I love them is by communicating truth to them so that God can go to work on their hearts and minds. So in doing that, I think there's a few ways that we can go about addressing this objection of religious pluralism in a way that does both. And the first thing I think we need to do is to appeal to a person's reason, right? To appeal to their mind and the way that they think, and to challenge the way that they think. God is intensely interested in our minds. And even when God speaks to his people, he talked about, and this comes out of Isaiah 1:18, right? He's speaking to, at this point, an obstinate Israel, and he's saying, let's reason with each other. Let's talk about the facts as they are. And he goes into talking about how he as a father brought them out of Egypt, and he gave them the tender of a vineyard. He built a vineyard and he made it as great as he could, and he watered it and he nurtures it and he did all of those things, and yet the vineyard produced nothing but bad fruit. Right? He's reasoning with them. I did everything I could for you, and still the fruit of that is your disobedience. And so he says, so since I did everything I could to nurture you, now I'm going to bring the rod of judgment and of punishment in order to try and get you to come to your senses. Now that's God's discussion with Israel, but the point is that he's reasoning with them. Let's talk about the facts, and God does that. So my daughter came home and said, Dad, did you know that God can be different things to different people? And my knee-jerk response was to say, oh, that's wrong. The Bible tells us that's not the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Go to your room, right? I could have done that, and I'm not sure how effective it would have been. But I don't think that would have helped her to think through this piece of information that her teacher had given her. And so I did what I thought was best at the moment in trying to explain to a 7-year-old that God can't be different things to different people. So I grabbed we have a fruit bowl on the island in our kitchen. So I grabbed two things that are pretty familiar. So I grabbed an apple and an orange. Let's think through this together. What have I got here? She said, an apple, and this hand, I've got an orange. Okay. She said, so this is an apple and this is an orange. I said, what if I told you that I believed this is an apple? I said, so is this an apple? She said, no, Dad, it's an orange. I said, okay, but what if I told you I believed it was an apple? To me, this is an apple. To you, this is an apple. So really, they're both apples, right? And she said, no, Dad, that's an orange. Right? It's obvious. I said, okay. So what you're saying then is that no matter what I believe or think about this orange, it's always going to be an orange. So this orange can't be an apple to me and an orange to you. Yeah, that's right. So I said, well, that's why God can't be different things to different people. I said, because if God is real, then who and what he is, that's not a matter of what I believe about him. That's a matter of who he is. He exists and he is who he is. And so all I can do is put my trust in what he's told me about himself. So he can't be an apple to one person and an orange to another because he actually exists. He's real. So she got it. She got the point. And then I tried to help point her to some other truth of Scripture. That's why Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Because he's the only way to God. Because God is real. It's God who's shown us the truth about himself, and it's God who makes that way possible. We can't invent it for ourselves, no matter how nice a belief we come up with. And so she seemed to get it. It helped. I'm not sure it was the perfect response, but that's how I responded at the moment. Another way of looking at it, and I've actually used this in a conversation too, and you alluded to it earlier in talking about what the Buddhists believe about God. I have another friend who I've spent time with. When I was still taking my kids to school, I'd walk by his house on the way home, and I'd drop by sometimes and bring him a coffee. And we'd chat. And at one point, we got into discussions about faith. And he said, yeah, you know what? He says, I believe there's a God. But I don't believe that there's just one way to him. Like, I don't believe there could just be one way to God. The classic response. And actually, at the time, I didn't have a response. I didn't know what quite to say, other than no. I didn't think that was good, so I kept my mouth shut. I said, oh, that's interesting, okay. But one thing I've learned to do is that if someone says something to me and I can't answer right away, I just tuck it away in the back of my head. And then I use it as a way to restart the conversation when we come back together again. Because I don't know about you, but I find it almost impossible to get conversations about faith going with people. So if they give me a nugget, I'm going to keep using it. I'll just keep using it as kindling for the next one. And so the next time I brought him coffee, I came back and said, you mentioned something to me last time we were talking that really got me thinking. I've been thinking about it. He said, really? What did I say? I said, well, you said, right, that you believe in God, and I think that's great, but you don't see that there's just one way to believe in God, like there's just not just one religion. And so here's the response I had when I had time. Here's the response I thought of. I said, now, the reality is this, though. Like, if I just think about these four major religions in the world, and their most basic belief, is around just the concept of God itself. And I said, the thing is, in the Buddhist religion, there is no God to speak of. It's really atheistic in its outlook. It's more of a philosophy than it is a religion. And they really don't appeal to any deities to speak of. Whereas in Hinduism, the Hindus believe that everything's God. Ultimately, they don't have a personal God that they look to, but they refer to Brahman as an indefinable principle of existence that is in and makes up everything. Kind of sounds like the Force in Star Wars, right? Brahman is it permeates everything. And the ultimate destination for us is that we would come to the place where our Atman, as our individual soul, becomes one with Brahman. We are absorbed into the great ultimate one. So that's the Hindu concept of God. Now in Islam, Islam is rigorously monotheistic. That is one God. Allah is one. In fact, the greatest attribute of Allah they refer to as Tawheed, that Allah is absolutely, there's none beside him. He's a monad in that he is absolutely individual in his being and person, and nothing can corrupt him. So unfortunately, it almost makes Allah unrelatable, because if Allah relates to something, then whatever he's relating to will corrupt his oneness. So I'm not sure how that all works out in Islam. But at any rate, Allah is one God and one person. Whereas, of course, Christianity, we're monotheists, one God, but we're Trinitarian. One God in his being who exists in three persons, right? And if you ever, actually I had a chance once I was at my daughter's ballet recital, and it was at the public library in downtown London, and there was a display table for a local mosque set up, an information. So I didn't have anything else to do for a few minutes, so I went up and talked to them, and I just was up front. I said, I'm a Christian. I said, I'm interested, you've got some material here. What is it you think I need to know? I said, can you teach me a little bit? And he said, oh, Christian. He grabbed the first flyer, and it was, who was Jesus? He said, your problem as a Christian is that you believe in three gods. And I said, no, I don't. And he said, yes, you do. So I said, no, I don't. He said, yes, you do. And he went on to explain how we've made Jesus into a God. And so there's no way of reconciling the Muslim view of God with the Christian view of God. They are mutually exclusive, as are all the other four. Now, I did this a lot quicker with my friend, but the question I asked him was this. I said, given this, can you explain to me how God can be different things to different people when most people's concepts of God necessarily exclude the other? They are logically exclusionary, right? They contradict each other. God can't both not exist and exist as a principle of all existence in all things, and be an individual in one person, and be one God in three persons. He has to be one or none, but he can't be all of them. And his response was, I'd never really thought about that. And that's about as far as we got in terms of resolving that, except I tried to help him understand that's why the Christian message points to Jesus as the only way. So appealing to reason, just helping people to think through. I find that most people in discussions around faith and spirituality, as with many other issues, people just pick up their beliefs in bits and pieces. They kind of pick them up along the way. They hear something that sounds good, or they've heard it enough, and so they learn to repeat it. And so this idea that, there can't just be one way, right? We all know there are many paths to God. The reality is that probably people really haven't thought that through. And so a part of our witness, I think, is just helping them think it through. Really, let's just think through reasonably the implications of that statement? And does it really square with our understanding of reality? Along with that, then, I think, is learning to ask good questions. And there's a couple passages that I think are great reminders of this. Proverbs 18:15 says that the heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. Right? A discerning person in bearing witness for Christ, I think, needs to learn how to understand the person that they're seeking to witness to. And I think one of the best ways to do that is asking questions. Proverbs 18:15 does not say both of those things. I'm pretty sure that the second one comes out of James somewhere, saying everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. The last pastor we had, he used to say this at our church. He used to say, God gave us one mouth and two ears because he expects us to listen twice as much as we speak. That's a good rule of thumb. Speak less, listen more. So learning to ask good questions, I think, is a great strategy for responding. So let's just reverse the tape for a minute and we'll go back to Oprah. And so she blurts out a statement, right, that sounds so true. And everybody in her audience would go, that's right. She says this, that there are a million ways to be a person. There can't just be one path to God. So we could just ask Oprah a question. The question is, well, how do you know that the many paths all lead to God? Have you ever followed them all? How do you know that? How could you know? I wonder what she'd say. I'm not sure. But that would at least hopefully get her thinking. Brian McLaren says that no doctrines are to be absolute, and truth or doctrine must be considered only with personal experience. So my question to him would be, well, when you say that no doctrines are to be absolute, do you mean that absolutely? Do you mean that's true for everybody in all places and all times? Because that seems like an absolute truth you're claiming there. Or when you say that truth or doctrine must only be considered with personal experience, did you determine that doctrine to be true by personal experience? Did you experience that somehow to be true? And if so, why should I subscribe to your experience? Why should that hold any authority for me? Right?